Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video. Today I am going to speak to you about politics. I am going to rant. I'm going to rant because I am angry. I detest this government and I have every right to detest them because they have serially lied to us, to me as a member of the electorate. We have had a pandemic. We are in a pandemic. We have had lockdown rules that I've broadly agreed with. We have had some, pretty harsh changes to our social behaviours that have been mandated by the government. And it now looks like the government have failed to adhere to their own rules. They have lied to us quite a lot, and they should be held to account. So let me just go through some examples of what they've been doing and explain the situation with regard to all these parties that have been taking place at the highest levels of government, whilst the rest of the country has been in lockdown, unable to go to funerals and see loved ones in hospital and have any form of gathering at all. Government can just have a piss up together in the back garden of number 10. So anyway, I'll be going through some newspaper articles to look at that. So let's have a look at some of the accusations that have been made. And these aren't so much accusations, are just plain facts. I mean, these are out there now. We now know that Boris Johnson and government officials and potentially ministers as well have been involved in breaking the rules. And the rules are those that they put in place themselves for the whole of the country. And this is yet another example of one rule for us and another rule for them, which feeds into this idea of resentment for the elite politicians. This is really egregious in my opinion, because we had heaps of examples of people who were unable to go to funerals of their loved ones, who were unable to visit loved ones in hospitals as they died, that were unable to meet for whatever reasons. And in fact, there's been a group of bereaved families that have been, pillorying the government for the activities that have taken place that I'm just about to explain. What I'm going to talk about is incredible double standards and outright hypocrisy that makes the government and Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, look morally repugnant. The issue here is that Boris Johnson and his government said, we're all in this together. We've got to pull together. It's our national spirit. We have to fight this pandemic with a collective approach. And that is having a lockdown, following the rules. And over again, we were told the rules. Rules that I broadly agreed with. I'm not disputing the rules here. What I'm angry about is the fact that Boris Johnson himself broke the rules repeatedly, and broke the rules in ways that were completely unnecessary. So what we have, what is coming out every day, more and more examples are coming out. We have times when Boris Johnson and his close aides and team broke the rules of lockdown, which were variously at different times, sort of, you couldn't leave your house, you couldn't meet anyone else, and then it was okay, you could meet 6 people outside, but you couldn't have inside gatherings outside of your own family, outside of your own little bubble. And all these very tight rules were put in place, and people were being fined. People were being fined by the police, investigated by the police, and fined for breaking those rules. And now what's happened is we have at least 12 instances where the government and Boris Johnson himself broke those rules. Let's just go through a list that The Guardian have compiled that we know pretty much definitely so far. So the full list of alleged government COVID rule-busting parties. From cheese and wine in Downing Street to boozy leaving do's, the number of suspect events grows to 15 now. And here we see the famous picture that's been going around the UK news of these boozy parties that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has tried to lie about, to say, oh, they were just a work, they were at work. It was just, drink on a Friday afternoon at work. In fact, what was happening is that government employees were going down to the local off-licence with empty suitcases, buying a huge amount of booze, coming back and having a party back at number 10, back at the Prime Minister's residence. So here we have this list. 15th of May 2020, I won't read all of this, but 15th of May 2020, cheese and wine in the number 10 garden. Boris Johnson, his then fiancée Carrie, and up to 17 staff were pictured in the Downing Street garden during the first lockdown with wine and cheese. The event took place while people were only allowed to meet one other person from outside their household, outdoors. And here we have 17 staff and Boris and his fiancée. So 19 people meeting together for cheese and wine. Just 5 days later, a bring your own booze party in the number 10 garden. A leaked email surfaced showing one of the Prime Minister's top officials invited more than 100 Downing Street staff to a bring your own booze party just a few days later. 19th of June 2020, Prime Minister's birthday. So this is, I think, the one that's just come out now, that his now wife organised a party for him. Despite COVID rules forbidding indoor social gatherings, ITV reported on Monday that a birthday party was thrown for Johnson, organised by his now wife and attended by up to 30 people, with a cake presented to the Prime Minister. 13th of November, alleged Downing Street flat party. 25th of November, Treasury officials impromptu drinks. 27th of November, Johnson gives a leaving speech for Cleo Watson. So there was a leaving party to pay tribute to someone who was leaving the team. Pre-Christmas 2020, Defence Minister leaving events. 10th of December 2020, Department of Education staff party thrown by Gavin Williamson, who is now up for, I think, a peer, which means he's going to be a Lord something, I think, or some kind of, maybe an OBE, MBE, whatever, one of those honours. I'll have to check that out. 11th of December, wine fridge allegedly delivered to number 10 for Wine Time Fridays. Pictures of our £142 drinks fridge reportedly delivered to number 10 formed part of another Daily Mirror story, which said Downing Street staff continued to hold Wine Time Fridays throughout the pandemic to let off steam. 14th of December 2020, CCHQ, Christmas, that's Conservative campaign headquarters, party for Sean Bailey. Christmas quiz attended by Johnson. Department of Transport, low-key distance gathering by fewer than 12 staff. Cabinet Office Christmas party. Downing Street Christmas party. And 16th of April 2021, boozy leaving do held the day before Queen mourned the Duke of Edinburgh alone. Why that one's important is the Queen herself was not allowed to mourn the death of her husband, Prince Philip, in public with other people. So there's that famous picture of her sitting alone in the church, the Queen. And this is why Boris Johnson's had to apologise to the Queen. Now, what's happened about this? Well, we have this scenario where time and time again, Boris Johnson and his party, or at least all those in his party supporting him, are saying, hang on, let's not pass judgment yet. Let's wait for the Sue Gray report. And this is their get out of jail free card. So they say, we've got this report that's being carried out by Sue Gray into all of these parties. And once we get the findings of this report, then we can act. Until then, we're not going to really talk about it. Everyone's up in arms about this. And the reason they're up in arms about this is that Sue Gray is a civil servant employed by Boris Johnson. He is her boss. So he's asking someone who works for him to run the investigation into him and expecting that to be an impartial investigation. Not only that, it gets worse. She has no right to ask for people's WhatsApp messages. She can't get information off people. She doesn't have those rights. She is not the police. The police are not investigating this, even though the police investigated the general public for doing far, things that were not nearly as bad as what Boris Johnson and his cronies have done. Right? The police investigated them, but they're not investigating Boris Johnson. Instead, he's getting one of his own members of staff to investigate him and produce a report where she's not allowed to access most of the data. And we know that government memos have gone to employees to ask them to wipe all their WhatsApp accounts. So all the data's being got rid of anyway, and we know that 100%, that's already come out. But it gets worse than this. Let me show you another article based on what we've now found out about this Sue Gray report. So here we have the Nadine Zahawi, who is a government minister who has come out this last week to say that the Sue Gray report will not be published in full. So you've got the government and all of Boris Johnson's cronies and Boris Johnson himself saying, wait for this report, no one do anything. And you have loads of memes in the UK at the moment about, nothing being able to happen until the Sue Gray report comes out. So there's a heap of memes about the Sue Gray report in loads of different contexts, and they're quite funny. The idea is no one can do anything until a Sue Gray report is given. And now Nadine Zahawi has said, that report that everyone is waiting for, that Boris Johnson is demanding that we all have to wait to see, will now no longer be released fully to the public. You will not be able to see the report. You will only, and he's very careful with his language here, you will only be able to see the findings of the report, which is almost like a heavily edited executive summary. Because the data in the report is going to implicate so many government, workers and politicians and ministers. So this is the general theory that's going at the moment, is that they're having to say you can only see the findings because they don't want anyone to see the actual detail of X, Y, Z. These people were breaking the laws, breaking the rules. So, you might get to a situation where the report does implicate Johnson, because I don't think he can get away with this. So our Prime Minister, might have to resign on the back of this. But this is about damage limitation now. So it's about, okay, but we can't afford to lose anyone else. So therefore, the report cannot be published. Even though this is a report that is an insider job report that cannot access most of the information that it needs. It's an incredibly partial report, partisan report. Even if she does a really good job as far as she thinks she's doing, she is not an objective investigator. She is a government civil servant doing an investigation on her boss. But the fact that now it's not going to be available to the public is an absolute disgrace. It's a disgrace. So what does this say? Well, it's going to exclude evidence, I think, from of emails, texts, and other details of what happened at the parties. So just to give you the introduction here, only the findings of Sue Gray's report into alleged lockdown breaking parties at Downing Street will be published, Nadine Zahawi has said. in another apparent step by the government away from promising full transparency with what she uncovers. This is the problem, is that we are seeing the really quite quick death of democracy. It's happening in America with what Trump is trying the whole time, and people challenging elections, and people and politicians and lawmakers over there impinging on people's rights to vote by changing voting laws and making it more difficult for certain demographics to vote. It's hugely anti-democratic. Same sort of stuff is happening over here. This is the sort of action you'd expect of a totalitarian government. But this is a modern democratic UK government that's supposed to be, we're held up as a paragon of democracy to the world. I don't think that's at all true. And I think our whole democratic system is corrupt, and first past the post as a voting system is completely broken, particularly in the way it is used in the UK. But these sorts of things, like, okay, we're going to have an investigation, but we're going to run the investigation into ourselves, and you're not going to be able to read the reports, only the key findings, and that will be heavily edited, is completely undemocratic and is lacking any kind of transparency that we in modern times should expect and do expect. As it continues, a keenly awaited report by Gray, a senior civil servant tasked with looking into the claims about a series of parties, number 10, and around government during COVID restrictions, is expected to be completed later this week. Asked if it would be published in full, Zahawi told BBC4, Radio 4's Today programme, so the terms of reference for Sue Gray's report is that the findings of her report will be made public, and the Prime Minister has pledged he will come to Parliament to then make a statement and be scrutinised by colleagues on the findings of that report. And he was challenged on this and just fell back on the findings. It's it's an absolute disgrace. I can't tell you how incredibly angry with our government I am. Now, obviously, you're going to expect this from me, a kind of liberal lefty. I'm never going to be a fan of Boris Johnson and the Conservative government. But man, the whole pandemic has been just a series. They keep bigging themselves up by talking about how wonderful we were, the vaccine, which is rolled out by the NHS, not the government. The government saying, right, let's get everyone vaccinated. Okay, well, yeah. I mean, you can pat yourselves on the back for that decision, but that's pretty obvious. That's what any decent government would say, which is get the vaccine quickly, get as many people vaccinated as possible. I mean, that's the bare minimum, right? But at the beginning of the pandemic, we had the highest death rates in Europe, pretty much, amongst the highest death rates in the world. And the government were completely inept. In fact, they were worse than inept. They were corrupt because they kept things like, and I did a video on this before, but kept things like Cheltenham Festival because they had vested interests in horse racing. So the health minister at the time had money in horse racing, and so kept Cheltenham, a super spreader event of 250,000 people going, instead of doing a lockdown before Cheltenham, said, oh no, we're going to do it just after Cheltenham. So we're going to allow the super spreader event to take place because we're all going to make loads of money off it. And then we're going to bring a lockdown in. And then they've given out billions and billions of contracts to on the fast track scheme, which they don't have to be scrutinised, and they just give out contracts to their mates, right? So they've been giving out multi-billion pound contracts to themselves and to friends of theirs. That's now, just like last week, they've now found that to be illegal. So the government broke the law in what can only be described as outright corruption. And now we have this, which is not only did they break the law in very corrupt ways, but they broke the law in very obvious. We've set a bunch of rules around COVID lockdown, and we're just going to break them. And it's going to be the very people at the top of government who are the Prime Minister, who is breaking these most routinely, breaking these rules. I am utterly I can barely find the words. That's how angry with my government I am, and with my Prime Minister. He's got to go. I've watched the last 6 Question Times, which is a BBC flagship political programme where they get a panel of people on every week to talk about topical events. And the Prime Minister has been eviscerated every single Question Time. I mean, completely. And the audience has to be demographically, politically proportionate. So they have to have like a certain amount supporting the government, a certain amount supporting Labour, a certain amount supporting SNP or whoever, depending on who's on the panel, I think. But it's a proportionate audience always, to make it sort of a fair thing. So it's not just a completely partisan audience. And yet, every week they say, does anyone want to put up their hands or ask to say something in support of Boris Johnson? No one. No, I mean, he has lost huge amounts of support. And last week's Question Time was an absolute shocker for the government, because it was up in Scotland, and Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's this toff of an MP, who slagged off the Scottish ministers from the Conservative Party because they had stood up against Boris Johnson's behaviour. So he slagged them off, and that really annoyed them. So then on Question Time, they had one of the leading Scottish Conservative members of Parliament who just said Johnson's going to resign. So in his own party, he's getting attacked, and you had the whole panel was against Boris Johnson. That's really rare, because you had an array of different voices. Everyone was against the Prime Minister. The audience was against the Prime Minister. He has to go. He has to go. What I worry is that if he goes, they'll bring some other people in who then the general electorate will forget. By the time we get to election, they'll forget about Boris Johnson and then forgive the government. It's like, no, this is unforgivable. They should be punished at the polls. They should be punished by losing in a landslide election, the next general election, because they are an absolute disgrace. This government, I mean, is exactly what I was predicting up front, which is, typical Tory corruption and etc., etc., etc. We have got what we voted for. But do you know what the problem is? Most of the electorate don't watch Question Time, don't follow the news closely enough. I've spoken to people who, an extended family, who are like, oh yeah, I like Boris Johnson, he's funny. It's like, you do realise what he's doing and what he's done. Like, that he's lied to you. He's outright lied to you. I mean, goodness, before he became PM, he was sacked from 2 jobs for lying. Literally for lying. No, he's funny. Oh, okay. If that's your criterion for the person running your country, that they have to be funny, then you shouldn't have the right to vote. I mean, and yet, he is still afforded far too much support, just on the basis that people don't watch the news, or they watch news that is completely biased. And it's very, very similar to America, and don't have a proper understanding of what's going on and how much of a terrible, terrible Prime Minister he really is. I mean, it is an absolute shocker. So, whatever. I'm not happy with our government, as you can hear, and they should be punished. Keir Starmer, who's the Labour leader, who has been fairly weak and ineffective, was superb in Prime Minister's Questions in the House of Commons the other day, where he took Johnson and a party to pieces. We've had a defection. So one of the Conservative MPs for Bury South up north walked across the aisle and has joined the Labour Party. Again, you could be quite cynical to say that it was one of the key Labour strong, what was called the Red Wall up north, where you get all these sort of, traditionally northern industrial towns that have always been Labour, have then started going Conservative recently, because there's a deunionisation of the electorate, and there's no one's really interested in workers' rights and all these things that have been what have kept Labour going over the last centuries. So you've had a slight, loss of, or quite a major loss of support for Labour up north. But then with what's been going on, I think this guy from Bury South has seen that he only won by 400 votes anyway, and that swing back to Labour will be big in those sort of places. So is probably a bit, although morally he's right in leaving the Conservative Party for the actions of the Prime Minister and what's been going on in Tory blackmailing and all this kind of stuff that's going on. He's also been, pretty astute in trying to read the future. If he wants to get re-elected, he probably needs to go to Labour. So yeah, there is that. But this is important stuff for the Tories. Their support is waning, and rightly so, because they are an absolute shocker of a government, and I just can't understand anyone who votes for them. Anyway, there's my political rant. I feel very strongly about this, and I think this government should be held to account. But as ever, the problem is that the media is controlled by the right in Britain, hugely so. So you have is it about 7 of the newspapers are overtly Tory. So you got, what is it, Daily Mail, Daily Express, The Sun, the Evening Standard, the basically Financial Times, although that's centre right. Did I say The Sun? Yeah, all these newspapers, Spectator, Times, they're all right wing. Left wing tabloid is the Daily Mirror. Broadsheet, as was the Guardian. Tiny readership compared to all of these others. These have huge readership. Guardian and the Mirror are the only left-wing newspapers. So they're vastly outnumbered in readership and power and the ability to inform the public. And on television, you've got Sky News and you've got the BBC. Sky News is centre-right. The BBC, right-wing always say it's left-wing. Left-wing always say it's right-wing. It just sits in the middle and is actually a mouthpiece for the government to a great degree, and has now been threatened with being defunded. So we're going to lose the BBC because the government had tried to do some spin doctoring by saying, don't look at all the scandal that's going on here, check out the BBC, we're going to defund them. And so everyone starts talking about that, and it's your classic bit of government, sleight of hand, magician's sleight of hand. So and now you've got GB News on the scene as well, who are overtly right wing, and you've got other players coming on. I think it's UK News that's going to come online, which should be right wing as well. The left have nothing. They have nothing other than some YouTube channels. Realistically, so the media landscape is heavily supportive of the right wing, and that's what we see. Anyway, the future's bleak, and it shouldn't be, because this government have made such a balls up that they should be out of power with consummate ease. But when you're fighting a media landscape that is very pro right wing, it's difficult to make headway. Rant over. Challenge everything, particularly yourselves. Question it all. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, share, and do all those things. Take care. Speak soon.